Hey everybody, Brett Rice, Core Vision Financial Group. Hey, today we're going to try something a little bit different. We've got some friends of ours that are going to join the podcast, and they're going to talk about the different industries that they work in and kind of give us a market update of, what's going on in the world around us. We're going to have three guests today. One of them's going to be, in real estate, one's going to be in trucking, one's going to be in construction, aggregate building materials. It's going to kind of give us a very broad industry chat about what's going on out there. Prices is affecting everybody. How's building going? Like what are all those things we see coming in 2022? Freight costs, real estate prices, rent. We're going to talk about all those things. So I think you're going to find this very interesting today as we move forward in this podcast. So enjoy. All right, Beau, you want to take this time, introduce yourself, and then introduce our guest today?
Thanks for joining us, and I'm Beau Browning, partner here at Core Vision Financial Group, and today we have three guests with us. We're going to do a little bit different podcast this month by having a panel of industry experts, and I'm going to go around the horn and let them introduce themselves, tell you about their business and what industry they are in. So I'll start with Chad.
My name is Chad Stickley. I'm the owner of a Step Ahead Management. We manage single-family properties around investment properties around Indianapolis and the surrounding suburbs. We currently manage about 275 properties and work almost exclusively with investors.
Matt?
My name is Matt Hale. I'm the president of Shelby Materials. We are a ready-mix concrete and aggregate supplier located Indianapolis area, South Central Indiana. We have 10 ready-mix locations and 2 gravel pits.
And Ryan.
I'm Ryan Schilling. I'm a third generation of a family that owns a trucking and logistics company by the name of Fraley and Schilling here in Indiana. We have like 5 locations around the United States and kind of serve the whole 48 state or continental U.S. With about 800 employees total.
Great. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm excited about this because in our business, we talk so much about the market, the economy in general, but what affects it are these subsets of industry or what we refer to in our business as sectors. And so we want to get insight as the last kind of year and a half has transpired with COVID and now people talking about inflation so much. I want to get some knowledge from you three about what trends you're seeing in your specific business, how they're impacting, whether that be good or bad. And so I'm going to have questions for everybody. I hope that the audience enjoys a little bit different format than we've done in past podcasts. And I'm going to try to do a few rapid fire questions to each of our experts here. And then at the end, we'll do a little summarizing with some questions for each one of them. So, Chad, we're going to start off with you. What is a typical investor or portfolio? What is a typical investor portfolio or ideal client in your business?
For us personally, we're an intentionally small business. So we have 3 employees. It's myself, my wife, who's the property manager, and a third person who's worked with me for about 10 years. So we like having a very personal relationship with our clients. So we have a little over 100 clients. So our ideal client is someone who's typically coming in, purchasing their first investment property, maybe their second investment property, and is looking at slowly growing on, adding 2 or 3 a year. Most of my clients I've worked with for 10 years now started with me with 1 property and now has, a dozen, 15 properties with me.
Well, that's pretty unique. We actually get a lot of clients asking us about the real estate game, right? We want to buy a second home. We want to be able to rent it out. Do you see rent versus owning becoming more or less popular, and why?
Obviously, a little biased, but I've been saying the rent side of things for years. And I think if you start looking at some of the build outs, not only downtown in Indianapolis right now, but Fishers, Carmel, Noblesville, I mean, it's almost becoming a little too multifamily right now. But I think that in addition to having a younger demographic being the millennials, which obviously everyone's been, keying in on for the last 5-6 years, also having the work from home side of things, I'm telling you right now, from a processing applications of new people coming in looking for rental homes, there's so many now that are working not only out of state or their main employers out of state, but even out of the country. So I think that helps to lend itself to more of a renter side of things than the traditional home ownership model that we've seen in the past.
Yeah, and as a follow-up, is it also true that there is lack of supply kind of single family homes, new builds and things like that that would lead people more of a rental path until, more supply comes on the market?
Yeah, for as much building as has been done, there's actually a lack of supply in both. So not only on the home ownership side of things, but we make the joke about a lot of the apartments and townhomes that are around, especially in the suburbs. If you don't want to renew, especially at some of the increased rates, they've got 10 people waiting to take your spot behind you. So there definitely is an inventory constriction right now.
Okay. What's one piece of advice you would give to somebody that is thinking about getting into rental property ownership?
Get a property manager before you purchase the property. So
Okay.
I can't tell you how many people that call me very excited about purchasing their first deal. I love realtors. I work with them all the time, but they are very optimistic on rents and properties and aren't really seeing it from the operations side of things. So the worst call I can have is someone call me excited about their first rental property and saying they just purchased a $1,500 rental, and I tell them that I've managed a house next door for 10 years that rents for $1,000. So that's it's a rough way to get the relationship started. So I always tell people, you want to have that operations side of things set up before you purchase your first property, if nothing else, just to get a second opinion on things.
Right. I would think that insight on a relationship with you is probably, at least from the rental side, more valuable than somebody that's not in that day to day and doesn't see that.
Well, the joke I always make is the realtor shakes your hand at the closing table and walks away. And if I give you the wrong rent, then every single month for the next 10 years, you're going to be reminding me that I messed up on the rent amount. So I have a little bit more incentive to be accurate with you up front.
That's very true. Lesson one or two that you've learned over time on the management side.
From a management side, and this is probably across a lot of businesses, but being picky with exactly what it is that you're taking on, not only from a property type, but also from an investor. Like I said, we like dealing with more of the small mom and pop type people. We have owners that have 20, 25 units, but I would say the bulk of them have between 1 and 5 units. We stray away from the institutional stuff. It's a completely different ballgame. So I would say knowing how to pick your owners and knowing how to pick the properties that you want to work in, because the sign in the front of the yard is always going to be your calling card. And so there are certain areas you want to attract to that and certain areas you want to detract.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Chad, for that insight. And, Chad being in a certain subsector of kind of the real estate business, managing properties and understanding a lot from rental standpoint, has some good insight kind of what's going on in that marketplace. So we appreciate it. Matt, again, appreciate you joining us here. You are in the aggregate business, part of industrial materials sector. If we were looking at that, with the boom of infrastructure spending, what are the biggest challenges in meeting that demand currently?
Well, the biggest challenge is just supply in general. I think we try to balance the markets we're in, infrastructure, public versus private, and you try and maintain a good balance of all of those. So I think just being able to manage the work, a supply side, I think the supply chain in our industry has been pretty tight with aggregate here in this market. So I think as time goes on, it becomes kind of a pick and choose a little bit. And so how do you determine which projects to take, not to take, and maintain a good customer base and good margins?
Okay. Is it extremely hard right now to keep up with raw material demand? Just because, literally pulling it from the ground, can you keep up?
Well, it's been very difficult. Now, I think what happens is every market is busy. Residential, commercial, large commercial. Everybody's seeing the big boxes going up everywhere. All the homes going up, even though and there is a shortage. We hear the same thing. And I think just as busy as every segment is, that's caused the demand on the supply chain. And I think that's going to be an issue going forward. There's not enough materials, I don't think, for the amount of projects going on. There's some very large projects in our area, infrastructure wise, commercial wise. So I think it's definitely a concern. You really have to plan out, budget out when you're talking to suppliers on what's available, and hopefully manage to get through the work.
Yeah, and as our clients or friends take a listen to this podcast, that is another reason why jobs, even at your house, whether it's concrete or not, are going to be delayed, a year out, 2 years out. Everybody's experienced that because it's hard to keep up with the demand that is out there. Matt, you had mentioned private and public, and I hope I asked this question the right way. Are private or public jobs a bigger part of the overall spending in the industry, or just makeup of your industry every year in the U.S.? The biggest reason I'm asking that question is a lot of us see roads and bridges and all that kind of stuff being done. Does that component where you end up with that public spending make up more than all the private spending, or is it not even close?
It really varies year to year, but for the most part, typically private is a larger portion. I would say for us, infrastructure, public roads, bridges has always been a smaller set. I would say in the 20% range, 25%, but that varies year to year and market to market. I mean, we have different markets where that's a major part of it, and we have other markets where it's more residential, more private, more commercial warehousing. So I would say over time we try to keep a good balance, but I would say it's definitely less than private side.
Okay. And last question, Matt, does it ever feel like a struggle to try to maintain a family business in an economic environment that pressures companies to constantly scale and grow, merge, acquire? Kind of give us a yes, no there, and then maybe a little bit longer-winded answer of why.
I'd say there's always pressure on that. You always have to think long term. I think no matter what business you're in, and much like Ryan, we're third generation with my family, and you're always looking to grow, but grow smartly. In our business, we like to be contiguous to our other locations, so you can help out and assist on jobs, share workers, share drivers. So it's kind of a situation where you want to grow smartly, and where you can grow. I mean, not a lot of people want a concrete plant in their backyard. So, I mean, you got to go where the proper zoning is and really kind of forecast long term is how we try to look at things. I mean, the other option is acquisitions, which happens some of our markets more with other players than us, but those are the only two options to have. So you always look at it. There is always pressure to try and grow and grow that way, but we are pretty we take our time and try and do it the right way.
You mentioned, not everybody wants a concrete business right in their backyard. And I've driven by some of your plants that not have, obviously the one here in Shelby County, but the one in Brown County, I think, and the one up near Westfield. They are pretty much in the middle of nowhere. For you guys to move material from there, obviously you got to drive a little ways to get some places. So I can imagine that gas, costs factor in. And that'll probably be a discussion here with Ryan too. So thanks, Matt. Again, your insight on industrial material business. We appreciate that. Ryan, I'm going to move to you now. So we've got trucking, logistics, hauling freight, whatever you want to call it. And in this day and age, with a massive rise in cost of everything, what can you tell us about shipping rates, and maybe what are all the underlying things that are affecting those?
Yeah, sure. So traditionally we see, I don't know, year over year, if you look back the last 10 years, a flat, maybe 5-6% increases every year. A lot of that's related to our fuel costs. Looking at 2021 to the end of 2020 or the beginning of 2022, we've seen basically about a 75% increase in shipping rates, and that's just like industry averages. We have seen, upwards of 200% in other lanes. So just like anybody else, everything we touch is increasing in cost. Inflation's catching up. Our equipment costs more, our labor costs more, our trucks cost more, our fuel costs more. And fuel only really represents about maybe 17 to 20% of that increase. And we've all seen, oil's at almost $100 a barrel right now. We're seeing, at least 5-year highs now on oil prices. So it's the rates are at this point are as high as we've ever seen them. They may have flattened out just a little bit in the last 3 months or so, but they're going to stay high at least through the rest of this year.
Okay. So the second part of that question was, are shipping rates skyrocketing like most goods and services? You pretty much answered that, because the percentage increases that you just described are happening everywhere, but also being passed on essentially to that shipping rate, which is one of the last costs there. You and I had talked about this a little bit beforehand, and take this question where you will. Is fleet size important for sales in your industry?
Okay, sure. So one thing that's kind of interesting about our industry is that about 98 or 99% of trucking companies in the United States for truckload, not less than truckload, but truckload carriers are less than 15 trucks. So it's very, there needs to be more consolidation there. And what happens there is, we're, I think, number 150 or so on the top 100 of the United States. If you look at our top 50 customers, they're mostly direct to a customer, to a Walmart, to an Amazon, or whoever that might be. If you get, if you're 15 trucks or less, you don't really have the opportunity to work direct with those companies. So there's always a brokerage in between, which we have one, and but that just inflates the cost of shipping. So brokers right now are making a lot of money, and a lot of times the smaller trucking companies are working strictly for brokers. So there's always, there's this middleman always through 99% of our industry that is making more money than a lot of times the smaller carriers. So consolidation's a thing coming. But that kind of represents the difference between being a big carrier and a smaller carrier.
So mergers and acquisition activity is pretty prevalent. I mean, you see it happening.
It's at an all-time high, but I mean, it has a long way to go to catch up with a lot of other industries that we see or that we're compared against.
Okay. This one is probably for our viewers, or at least the people that are in this arena, and everybody hears this buzzword, supply chain. They use it all the time now on TV, like everyone knows what it means. But how do we get past the supply chain constraints, or what they would refer to as a bottleneck? And is as a secondary question, so I don't have to stop you, is any of that due to a shortage, which would include a labor shortage, which would include drivers?
Okay. In my opinion, the supply chain constraints that are, shown on, news broadcasts and that is probably more related to getting goods into the United States. I wouldn't blame it too much on trucking or rail within the United States. There's a lot of, I'm sure we've all seen the video and pictures of the port in Long Beach and that on that, there's just container ships all over the place just waiting. And a lot of that is labor at the ports. But once it gets on the ground, I mean, right now, it's driven the cost up, but if you want something shipped today, you can get it shipped within the United States. It might cost more as I've explained, but there's not a lot of freight just sitting, waiting on a truck for days on end. That's not as, as big of impact as what I would say the container ships, waiting weeks to get unloaded, or maybe it's not getting shipped at all. Obviously, COVID has played a big part in that with shipping from other countries, and it just our whole economy has got to such a state of just in time. You don't want any inventory to build anything except for what you need today, and when you have any hiccup to that, which is what we have right now, it really slows the whole economy down there.
Do you see a time frame in which this will maybe be resolved? And again, you're not a prognosticator of that, but
what we've seen more is, or the best way to predict that would be, what's the constraints on, specifically Asia, the country, China, the countries that are shipping lots of goods to us. Are they shipping at a normal rate, and it gets more normal instead of big bunches at a time, or slowing things down? I think by the second half of this year is what I'm being told, especially with our we can't buy trucks because we can't, all these supply chain issues. We're being told maybe second half of the year it'll start to get a little bit better, but we're going to be dealing with this even this time next year.
Yeah. Yeah, something you don't think about. A trucking company can't buy trucks because the truck company that makes the truck can't get the parts to make the truck. So, we're dealing with a lot of that. Chad, one last thing I wanted to bounce actually back to you that got my mind thinking, as you see an end consumer, really, you see a person with money in their pocket that's renting a home. Do you obviously you've seen rental prices also go up as all these other things have gone up. We know we dealt with some rent moratorium, and all that kind of stuff. But do you see the end consumer able to afford more? You would probably have the most insight into that end consumer.
Yeah. No, I mean, I will say that once everyone got back, the incomes were definitely going up. I mean, especially when you start getting into some of the multifamily, like I said, some of the rents are just skyrocketing, but that's bleeding over into the single family as well. I mean, we're seeing houses at, 25, 30, 35% more than we would have rented them even just pre-pandemic. So there was, I think a couple things fed into that. I think that there was a pent up amount of demand because there was a period of time where no one moved. So you had a time where everyone was naturally wanting to move, and then you had the backlog that also wanted to get through there. And then there obviously a lot of money's been pumped into the economy. So we've seen a lot of people who have been sitting on, not only good regular income, but also have been sitting on a lot of savings. And so at that point are willing to take a little bit of a sacrifice, especially if they're in an area they want to be in. And that's where I keep going back to a lot of these pop-up areas in Fishers and Carmel and Midtowns and those kind of areas where people are willing to pay a premium if it's only for a year or two or so especially with the younger generation, until they start having kids and everything. In the meantime, they'd rather be able to walk out on a Friday and Saturday night and have 20 restaurants and bars that they could go to and all the other amenities.
I'm glad you mentioned that because the money supply obviously is at an all-time high, but also when you look at savings rates, money market savings also at an all-time high. So people are hoarding cash rather than, spending it, whether that's for consumption or dumping it into the stock market, which obviously we like. But you do have a record all-time high cash sitting on the sidelines, and it's been that way for quite some time. Okay. I appreciate all three of you. Again, thanks, Ryan, for rounding out the three panel guests there at the end and giving us some good insight into the logistics and trucking. I am going to do a quick rapid fire around the horn question for each of you. Again, try to keep it short and sweet. You've all done a great job. We'll start with Chad. We'll go to Matt. We'll end with Ryan. We'll just keep that same pattern. What is the biggest obstacle your industry faces over the next 1 to 3 years or 12 to 36 months? And how does your industry overcome those obstacles?
I would say it's preparing for a market correction. And I would say it's an obstacle, but also an opportunity. I mean, there are a lot of investors sitting on the sideline right now looking at housing prices and waiting for them to come down and, having that as their next big portfolio boom. The fact that you have so many houses right now that are getting purchased with no appraisal, no inspection, above list, $50,000 brought to cash over list. I mean, you're creating a market where you have people that, if anything in the business side of their life or their personal side goes wrong, they've depleted through a lot of savings, a lot of things like that. So I think that that's where we're going to see the next market correction. And the challenge, I said, there's a challenge and an opportunity. There's a challenge if you can afford to hold on to those properties that you purchased. There's an opportunity if you're an investor sitting on the sideline that's able to swoop in, if something does happen, and get it at a significantly discounted market price.
That makes sense. Matt, I'll re-ask the question. Biggest obstacle your industry will face in the next 1 to 3 years, and how do you overcome it?
I think our biggest obstacle are drivers. We had an issue the last year and a half. We had several locations that lost 25 to 40% of our driving fleet. Every other competitor in that market has felt the same crunch. So I think just having enough CDL drivers in general is going to be a big issue. I think there's so many companies out there that now offer, with all the Amazons, all the warehousing going up, there's going to be a big driver need. We're kind of off hours a little bit, so that creates an additional challenge. We're starting at 4 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the morning, and sometimes working a little later. So it's not a set 9 to 5 job or 7 to 5, whatever it might be. So that's going to be the biggest challenge. And what we're trying to do is obviously try and engage the next generation, whether that be through the trade schools, vocational schools, kind of try and build that pipeline up. So as the next 3 or 4 or 5 years roll out, there might be some more interest in our industry. It pays well and it's good living, but that will definitely be our biggest challenge, I believe.
Okay. I think Ryan might echo you, so we'll just go quickly to Ryan.
Yeah, labor market for sure. Our industry, average driver is about 50 years old at this point. The average incoming driver to the industry is about 35 years old. That creates a problem. We have a lot of drivers retiring right now. We have to attract new, younger drivers to our industry, by making the jobs more attractive to them, by reaching out to them through new means of advertising and marketing, whether that be social media versus some billboard or a radio ad, just change how you connect with that new market.
Perfect. Chad, that actually brings us to the second question, and Ryan kind of already answered that on his end, but how do you attract new investors?
We've been very fortunate just with how I described our business earlier about being a smaller company. Ours it's 90% word of mouth, investor talking to investor. We've been fortunate with Google over the years too, of not having to do a bunch of pay, but do a lot of organic, advertising through that. But really I answer the phone and it's, a buddy of mine has 3 houses with you. We were talking over the weekend, and so that we've been fortunate from a marketing standpoint that's been the way. And honestly, when you get that kind of referral business, it's the best way to get a foot in the door. So.
Yeah, and our business is very similar. We rely on word of mouth. Matt, if you could share also how you attract employees or drivers, same manner as Ryan, is it heavy Facebook?
I mean, it's a lot of social media. It's a lot of going out to schools, going to job fairs. It also, much like Chad talked about, is word of mouth. A lot of our longtime employees, when you treat people well and are a good place to work, they tend to tell their friends, tell their family, tell their relatives, and a lot of time that referral employee stays around for a long time. We have several employees whose brother works there, whose cousin works there, whose son works there, and trying to build that up. And yeah, a lot of social media, any aspect available. So
okay. Ryan, with your, I guess I'll follow up a different way. With your business being spread across the country, do you market differently in any of those different markets? Or is it all the social media posts are the same, or is there some differences?
The jobs that we have are different in different areas. So
Okay.
We certainly, we have different type of hiring maps versus the different type of jobs, whether that be a flatbed truck or a dry van truck or maybe a bulk tank truck. Those are different jobs. Some of them are local, some of them are, regional, and some of them are more long haul. So you market those a little bit differently.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, lastly, positive note, growth opportunity. Chad hit on it already a little bit in his industry, especially if there's if we get repricing on housing and we have a crash, or I don't know if a crash is the best word to use on this podcast, but maybe a little bit of a downturn. Best growth opportunity for your industry. Chad, go ahead.
Correction is what we're referring to it as, not a crash. But no, it is the fact that, like I said, I've got owners who were huge purchasing houses 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. They're waiting for somewhat of a similar pricing to come back. So talking about a lot of that money on the sidelines, as houses do start to become more affordable, you start getting into some potential bank owned or foreclosure type houses. I mean, that's an investor special. I mean, they want something they can go in, do a complete remodel on, and and rent out for the next 10 years, and then potentially sell it on the next upturn.
Okay, Matt.
Well, I think when growth opportunities for us, you talk about the infrastructure bill, more of that type of work coming down the pipeline, and while fuel affects us on one end, it kind of helps us on the other end, with affecting the asphalt pricing. So sometimes concrete looks a little more valuable, long term, sustainable. Those type of projects.
Okay. And Ryan.
The biggest growth opportunity really in our business is, creating a culture at your business to, be able to grow organically, while also looking at acquisition. As I said, consolidation is a big part of our industry going forward right now, but you have to get it right at your own office here and make sure that it's a place people want to work. It's a very competitive environment for drivers, and they're always getting calls from some other recruiter. You got to make sure that it is one of the best places that they've ever worked, to retain as many of them as possible and do a better job than your competitors, and you will grow.
Sounds good. Well, as we wrap up here, again, thank you guys so much for this industry insight. I think people are going to find this extremely valuable. I had fun doing it. I hope you all had fun, sharing some insight. Thanks to Brett again as our host of the podcast every single month. I do need to learn to pick better friends since you all don't like Indiana basketball. I probably should pick panel guests next time that align with my sports choices. So. But anyway, again, thank you all. We appreciate it, and we'll see you soon.
Again, Beau, thank you for joining us this month here on the Core Vision podcast, and thank you for bringing that panels. We try something new. I really like the idea of getting some outside perspective to help us educate everybody. So any closing words from you?
No, I think this was great. I was excited to do it. It was an idea we had thought about, for the last 25, 30 days. Pulled it together, and really would love to do a few more of these in the future. So, if there's some people that are interested, please reach out to us. If you've got some industry insight, we hit a few industries today. Love to hit, some more maybe throughout this year, and we can do a couple of these as special podcasts.
Yeah, that's a great point. If anybody out there works in a specific industry or anything that they'd like to come on and talk about, please reach out to us and let's have the discussion. Let's include it in 5 or 6 months when we do the next one of these. So again, our contact information will be at the end of this video, so feel free to reach out. Again, thanks for watching the video.